Stephen Bartlett is not just growing his podcast. His podcast is actually the smallest piece of what he's building towards the future vision for his organization. And this is how I see it. We're going to talk about it in a second. But first, who the heck is Stephen Bartlett? He's the guy that you see in those viral clips with interviews from the Diary of the CEO, right? To come clear, when first I start hearing about him, I rolled my eyes, primarily because I'm like, he's everywhere. He's talking to all these people. Is he an industry plant? Like, all I can see is someone either sobbing in his videos or making some controversial statements, and he's hopefully asking good questions, right? Transparently, I haven't watched more than maybe like a handful of his full interviews up until October this year, or September. I think it was September, when I was at the Press Publish event here in New York with Colin and Samir, and he was actually one of the guest speakers. He was like the final surprise guest speaker, and I kind of liked the guy. He had a lot of good things to say. He seemed to be very like interesting and personable when you see him in person, right? And I just got curious. I was like, okay, let me just start paying attention and see where you're going with all of this. And what I realized very quickly, especially by like observing him for the past couple of months, is that the podcast is like, it's the big thing. Obviously, it's 30 million viewers, right? Like, where's he at when it comes to total viewership? Yeah, so over a billion. So he just recently, I guess, hit 1 billion views across all of his interests. Like, that's impressive. That's a good number. But to me, this is just a small piece of his up and coming and growing empire. And what I really see is this kind of like echoing, interconnected, patty, I don't know, burger, with the meat of it being obviously the Diary of CEO and all these layers being things that kind of like make it nice and juicy and appetizing for anyone like myself who interested in the business of being a creator. And this is where like the media layer of actual, Diary of the CEO podcast is, I feel like, just like the smallest part of this entire bucket, right? Again, solid numbers, they're doing great, quality interviews, have no issues with it. And the primary driver, of course, that it provides is the distribution, right? Like, this what's puts Steven out there, his brand, his name, his team out there when it comes to building the rest of this infrastructure, right? He goes out there, he talks to interesting people, he meets them, he asks good questions, creates a relationship there, added to the Rolodex. There might be some interesting opportunities, hint, hint, we're going to talk about, that were born out of this initial layer. But then they actually started to talk about expanding into more of an agency style organization as well, where in addition to just managing and having like, close to like 100 people, I think, managing his business when it comes to the actual podcast itself, and generating about, I think the estimate is $40 million that they're going to generate this year. They started to talk about, okay, but how can we expand? Can we develop the talent? Can we start finding new individuals, create network of podcasts and network of content that we can leverage, because we have the know-how, we have the technology, we have the talent. And as we grow the team probably sits sometimes on their seats without having much to do. So here you are, you can now introduce and give them a little bit more projects to do. And We Need to Talk became one of the first ones. I haven't seen like official on the page anywhere the confirmation, but from everything that I've seen from the news articles and some of the things confirmed on the background, this is one of the podcasts that directly coming from the Diary of the CEO network, right? They're essentially the first one, the first confirmed one, where you can even tell a little bit from the podcast perspective, from the setup, how professional it is, the titles, you can tell there's maybe some similarities, maybe same team working on both, right? And kind of like developing and again, emphasizing a lot of interesting conversations, right? Something that they're powerful and they're good at. But then the next thing, kind of like beyond just like talent and expansion, building up the kind of like the portfolio of the professionals who will continue to support distribution as well, right? Like, one of the benefits of this layer is that you can use that distribution to expand those podcasts and those other channels, but you can also then use their growing unique audience to go bring it back to the fold, add to this layer of the distribution, but also use it as a way to promote some of the other things that they will do. And the next layer that they announced actually relatively recently, earlier this year, is this SaaS, software as a service layer, where they announced Flightcast. Flightcast is essentially the platform, the set of tools for the creators to use to make it easy, make it easier to create great content. And platform it on various different social medias, right? That was kind of like the whole idea, is that they have the flow that enables you to go and publish it across multiple platforms, enables you analytics, throws in AI in there. Where can we go in the SaaS world without AI? But my interest in it is primarily coming from the fact that it creates the annual recurring revenue, right? This is the bread and butter of the software as a service, and why it became so popular in the last like 20 years is because you have predictable annual recurring revenue that again can become an interesting platform, because now that you know what the flow of the income is, you can start thinking about how to support the rest of the platform that you're building out from the distribution perspective on the media side, or the new talent that you're building out through the agency side. The only kind of like question mark there is the fact that it's not Steven's teams that build it. They're actually partnering with existing SaaS company, or a company that produces other SaaS tools that has engineers and has the experience. So I don't know to what extent there's a split of revenue, what kind of split of ownership do we have in place, from the perspective of just like long-term potential commitments, like what does that look like? Is Steven becoming more of a, board member, maybe face of the company, but all the operations supported and all the revenue gained from that remains with that company that develops it? So there's some questions about it, but and the main thing, the reason why I thought it would still be important to include here is kind of like from my last week's video about Mr. Beast, right? Annual recurring revenue platforms that you create for your creator business can both benefit from the distribution that you have, but also help you create the foundation from the perspective of recurring revenue that you can invest back into the distribution, back into agency to grow that side of the puzzle piece, so that you can then again continue to grow the rest of your business. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're just like the first of several entries by Steven and his team into this world of annual recurring revenue, the magical word for the creator. That's new to the creators, but in the tech world it's been around for 20 odd years or so. And that all, in my opinion, is really just like builds up to the biggest branch of their business right now. The one that I find the most interesting and curious is the investment side of things, right? Because this is what helps them build that long-term capital through those investments and interesting brands that both obviously helps Steven himself from his network worth, right? But primarily, I think the great opportunity to go and generate substantial amount of capital to invest in this other parts of the business, and again continue to kind of like keep expanding and growing this. And it's interesting because you would think that media would not have much to do with investments, but what I found to be a pattern is that a few of their investments, right, the flight fund, what they call investments from the flight fund, were into the companies that Steven met through his podcast, right? Like the interesting example was this gentleman by the name Tim Spector, who met and spoke with Steven about, just different things about the weight loss and the health of your gut and things of that nature. And then he turned out to be a founder of the company called Zoe that primarily focus on exactly that, right? Like provide better dietary options for people who are health conscious. And Steven happened to invest into that company a couple of years ago, right? And by now they also had another round of investments and they're planning to expand in the United States. So they were primarily EMEA focused, but this is not the only example. Steven meets back in 2019 with then CEO Julian Hearn. Then he's announced to be on the board, and he also invested into the company itself, which is Huel, right? Steven recently stepped down from the board itself, which is not uncommon. Board, it's a good practice in the companies to from time to time rotate your board members. Actually, good practice because Steven might be occupying a seat on the board that is needed for some other specialist for that next evolution that Huel has to go through, right? You can retain your investment in the company and just move off of the board to again free it up, maybe give a slot to someone else who has this very specific knowledge and experience, or maybe just in general you don't have enough time to go and actually be a productive value contributing board member, right? You're just holding up a seat. So that could have been another reason why he's stepping down. But the whole idea is that those are just a couple of examples, right? There's Whoop, there's a couple of other companies where Steven is primarily kind of like going through this loop of, hey, at some point those individuals show up on his show, he talks to them, creates the relationships. And that makes it interesting enough for them to evaluate them as an investment company. They go and invest and essentially continue going through this loop. So Again, not going to be surprised if we're going to see a few more of these examples. And the best part, if you think about where it can go, Steven can now consider the option of finding those companies, evaluating them, investing in them first, then bringing them or one of their team members, right, onto the podcast and use the podcast as a distribution network to promote it, and then use the same brand to go and like sponsor other podcasts and talent in the network to essentially continue augmenting the value of that business, grow your own equity stake within that organization, eventually maybe sell it, monetize it, and go through the cycle all over again. One of the companies, I think, I'm trying to recall if Huel is the one that is considering, I think Huel is the one that's considering IPO. One of the companies that he invested in is currently like in the talks and the debates about going public, which is an option to get the capital return for an investor, right? Sometimes you as an investor can choose to hold and not sell, but frequently IPO is not only done for the sake of the company, it's also done for the sake of long-term investors who are seeking an exit. And, you know, Steven's been in some of these companies for a little while, so now it gives him an opportunity to extract that capital, and once he does, he can go invest it into these other branches of the business that we just discussed, whether it's growing and improving his channel, creating new channels and developing the talent in the network, or founding, investing in the new SaaS companies, or even again pumping all that money back into the fund and start looking for more interesting brands that you can put through the cycle of bring them back in front of the screen, talk about them, promote them, grow them, sell them, get the money, and we're back on the same cycle. So it is interesting. That's what I'm saying. It's like, it's interesting how my brain works, because while it was just like interviews and sub stories and stuff like this, I was like, whatever. It's he's a talented dude. Have nothing against him. I don't know him. Like whatever, right? But just going through that poor moment of actually seeing him, listening to him in person, getting to know him a little bit as a person, then kind of like moving from there to going through the process of actually looking a little bit closer at his business, I realized that there's a lot of interesting things that someone like me just finds exciting, right? If you've been on this channel long enough, you know I love my topics of the business of being a creator, and it's interesting to see this evolution where creators no longer, again, which is thank God, think about hats and hoodies and whatever as the primary revenue drivers. Like we're building companies, we're building organizations, we're building freaking empires based on Mr. Beast's conversation that I had with all of you last week. So we're going to see a lot more, and I'm going to be on the lookout for a lot more of those examples and trying to figure out, okay, how does this all click and why would this creator pick this particular business? So if you have any other creators, suspected creator networks that are slowly kind of like growing and evolving into the actual empires, let me know in the comment section below. I'll be curious to go through the list and kind of like find a few other creators to study, and kind of like similar to what we've done with Mr. Beast, similar to what we've done with some of the other brands in the past, and now Stevens and kind of like Diary of CEO Empire. I'm curious to go digest it, figure out like how does this all connect together, and hopefully share it with you so you can learn something both about how to structure these businesses, but also get your juices flowing about your future as maybe a creator entrepreneur. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next Saturday. Peace.